Welcome back. When we were thinking together about Hebrew poetry, I mentioned a subgenre called lament. I noted that we find laments that give voice to the pain of an individual, but we also find laments that are composed to give voice to the cry of a whole community that are suffering the blow of a famine or a war. You know, it seems like just a few months ago, the experience of sharing an extended time of prayer with a small group at church, and one of the group was a college student who had recently come to faith in Jesus, but the past few months had been just exceedingly difficult for him, and at one point he began to pray, and before too long he just hung out all of his troubles and pains to God. And in the middle of a sentence, I felt like I'd inadvertently knelt on a faulty electrical connection. I mean, it was a jolt when another member of the prayer group, one of the pillars of our congregation, interrupted the student, saying, "Young man, we don't talk to God that way here." Well, as you might imagine, I wasn't the only one jolted. And it seemed like a perfect opportunity to segue from praying formally, though it felt a little bit like Nehemiah when he was in a tight spot. I call it the shortest prayer in the Bible. Remember in Nehemiah chapter 2 when the king asked Nehemiah what was troubling him, and remember that distracting the emperor with personal problems could be hazardous to one's health. So the Bible records, "So I prayed to the God of heaven and I said to the king." So I prayed to the God of heaven and I said to my flock. Let's think about this. What's unchristian about telling God we're hurting? Might there be something unchristian about not telling him? I mean, acting as if he didn't care, or if there wasn't anything he could do about it anyway? Is there something unchristian and unhealthy faith-wise, emotional health-wise, physical health-wise about burying the trouble? You know, as tough as life gets and as blunt and direct as the biblical lament is, I offer two observations. One is, the lament is not a pity party. It's actually an expression of trust, faith. And two, God gives no hint of taking umbrage. He's not offended. His ego isn't bruised. He doesn't just take it, he welcomes it. And as I may have occasion to mention again, I find it sad that so many Christians recoil at the notion of lament. I mean, fearful to address God directly in the second person, you. But those same Christians in times of hurt find nothing offensive with gossiping and grousing behind God's back, as it were. Talking about God, grousing to others. I just don't understand why I want to be sure that you see that as direct as the complaints in the lament are, they also express cause for confidence. They make reference to Yahweh's promise, His chesed, His steadfast love, His name's sake. They highlight that God is worthy of my praise. So in the complaint, they're calling Him my King, enthroned forever, my refuge, my rock. Look at those kinds of examples. And so pastorally, I'm concerned for my folk who are uncomfortable with Scripture's invitation to, well, to borrow from the other Testament, to cast all your care upon Him because He cares for you. But there's another element that causes discomfort for a lot of Christian readers, and that's the imprecations. For example, Psalm 5:10. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsel because of the abundance of their transgressions. Cast them out, for they've rebelled against you. Or how about Psalm 69, picking up with verse 22. Let their own table before them become a snare. When they're at peace, let it become a trap. Let their eyes be darkened, so that they cannot see. Make their loins tremble continually. Pour out your indignation upon them and let your burning anger overtake them. May their camp be a desolation. Let no one dwell in their tents. For they persecute him whom you have struck down, and they recount the pain of those you have wounded. Add to them punishment upon punishment. May they have no acquittal from you. Let them be blotted out from the book of the living. Let them not be enrolled among the righteous. Well, you get the idea. The hurting person of faith is calling down a curse on the enemy, the oppressor. So, note this well, that rather than grousing behind God's back, as it were, and rather than taking matters into their own hands and making it right, the faithful is giving their case to God and asking the righteous judge to act accordingly. I mean, check out 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. You might even want to pause it now and take a look at 1 Peter 2, 18 to 25. And particularly the charge that as Christ followers, I'm actually to follow Christ when evil and unjust attacks come my way. That rather than trying to get even, Jesus kept entrusting himself to the one who judges righteously. And that's what David and Jeremiah and other persons of faith are expressing in the imprecatory Psalms. Think about it. We'll see in a bit.